Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. In an update 120, it is looking like Wargaming are going to do a huge amounts of buffing and nerfing to your favorite tanks. So stay tuned as I break down all of the possible changes. Let me clarify. All of what I'm presenting in the video today is subject to change in future iterations of the 1.20 test server. And so we may or may not see all of these changes, but we've got a good idea that this is what Wargaming are planning on doing. So firstly, I want to talk a bit about buffing and nerfing inside video games. All big, successful, competitive multiplayer games frequently buff and nerf either their champions, their tanks, their guns, depending on what is meta inside the titles. It's something that Wargaming have done occasionally in the past, but it is completely fundamental for creating a healthy balance inside the game. And there are certain tanks that I'm hoping we're going to see nerfed today that are just kind of destroying the matchmaker. So firstly, big thumbs up to Wargaming for actually kind of balancing a game, which is one of the most important aspects of game development. And I really hope to see them investing more time and resources and analysis in this, because while it doesn't just generate pure cash immediately as if you sold some kind of overpowered premium tank, what it does is makes your game a better place and keeps your player numbers up. So there are 7 different nations which are receiving buffs and nerfs, at least with preliminary on the 9.20 test server. So let's jump straight in with the USSR. Firstly, the T-43 Tier 7 Soviet medium tank. It's getting really big dispersion buffs by roughly about 25% when moving its hull or turning the hull, and also 43% when it is turning the turret. That is a massive buff. The turret traverse dispersion will go from about 0.14 to 0.08. That's definitely in the area of not having to use vert stabs or a rotation device on this vehicle and being able to invest into other statistics. The problem is there's a reason why the T-43 has the worst win ratio of any of the Tier 7 mediums, and that is that it's kind of like a T-3485M, just it's not at Tier 6. And statistically, there's a lot of areas of this tank that probably could still receive some love, but this is a good step forward, and I like that Wargaming are doing small changes rather than just buffing absolutely everything about the tank and creating another AMX M4 54. Next up, the A44. Wargaming are significantly buffing the accuracy by 0.02, as well as also the dispersion when you turn the turret and the aim time. This will give the A44 a real hard punching 107mm gun with much better statistics so it can actually use it. And while the A44 has currently got the second worst win ratio of any of the Tier 7 mediums, I think these buffs should help it a little bit. But again, it's baby steps rather than huge steps to tanks, which they have a lower win ratio than all of the others, but not massively so. So I like Wargaming's process so far. Next up, Germany, the Spähpanzer SP1C. This is a tank that back in the day used to have a 3-round autoloader before it was removed, and Wargaming seemed to be just improving the gun handling of this tank massively by 38%. This is also the first tank in this list that is getting a reload buff from 10 seconds to 8.5 seconds, but that is the stock gun, and I guess the gun that everyone's going to be interested in is the Mekar gun, which is getting a buff from 9 to 7.5. This should actually give this vehicle comparable damage per minute to a lot of tanks, and when you also add this to fairly good view range and gun depression, yeah, this tank could actually be a big gainer. Funnily enough, this vehicle has massively better win ratio than the T-71 CMCD, but that's a collector's tank, so we'll have to see whether Wargaming address that one later on. I like this change for the SP1C, and while it's not going to become the new best one, it's definitely going to be a lot more playable. Next up, the HWK-12. Again, Wargaming are improving the gun handling of this tank, but when you move by 38% and when you turn the turret by 29%. Or let me correct myself there, sorry, that's 38% with the stock tracks and 29% with the upgraded tracks, so it's not actually the turret traverse dispersion that is being improved. You know what, that's going to help the tank a little bit, but it's really not going to turn it into comparable to the Tier 8 premiums in its tier. But again, baby steps, I like it, and possible future improvements down the line as well. Gun handling better on these sniping Germans. Next up, the Rhm Pz Wagen, which holds the title of pretty much being the worst Tier 10 light tank along with the Sheridan inside the game. So I'm really excited to see what Wargaming do with this. Okay, so firstly, they're decreasing the gun dispersion during movement and on hull traverse by 29%. That will be massive for a tank that really doesn't want to use vertical stabilizers, and with that improvement to the vehicle and a 1.6 second aim time, I'm expecting that this thing is going to have awesome gun handling. Next, they're improving the accuracy to 0.33. Again, a massive improvement to a light tank that is kind of meant to be the sniping light tank of tier 10. In addition to this, they're improving the gun dispersion when you turn the turret by 20%, so I guess the base will go down to 0.08. Again, an area where vertical stabilizers will not be the competitive module on this tank, and you don't really have room to use vertical stabilizers on a light tank, so all in all, really nice there. Next, they're also improving the reload from 9 seconds to 8 seconds, which will mean that the damage per minute on this vehicle is going up to 2,400. That is pretty spicy. Now, the only problem with this is, as I've talked about many times before when I'm playing the Manticore, for example, you kind of have to hide between all of your shots. But if you just have that wild opportunity to let rip, and it doesn't matter if you get spotted or if you're in close quarters combat, it's going to be really nice for the Rhm Pz Wagen. And also, an improvement to the aim time from 0.16 to 0.14. Wow, this vehicle's looking like it could be kind of fun in the next patch. So these are the first buffs or nerfs to a tier 10 tank, and they get a thumbs up from me. This tank needs some love, and Wargaming just aren't making this thing a flat-out, overpowered scout. Still going to have pretty horrible camera rating, although lovely view range, so you can trade some of that to pump it up a little bit. But this thing is definitely going to become a little bit more fearsome on the battlefield. It's definitely not going to be a leopard by any means, but it is going to be something that you're going to have to be more concerned about rather than thanking the gods that there is a Rhm Pz Wagen on the enemy team. All right, next up, German heavies. Tiger P is getting some love. 50 hit point buff, improved frontal turret armor, which, let's be honest, has been necessary for very many years. The Tiger P has had an absolute joke of a turret pretty much since it was put in. Look, this thing just gets overmatched on the roof. It's got the worst cupola that's sometimes penetratable by HE rounds as well. It's horrendous. So good job by Wargaming for finally doing something to this. I call it the Tiger percentage of my soul that I lose every time I play it. And Wargaming are also buffing the rate of fire of the 88mm by 0.9 seconds, which should give this thing fairly okay DPM for tier 7. So really nice changes for a vehicle that definitely needed a little bit of love. And there's a reason why the Tiger P is sitting nearly at the bottom of the list. All right, so next up, first of the nerfs, ladies and gents, boys and girls, T95, the Zoom Turtle, the Doom Turtle, the unstoppable machine inside the American tank destroyer tech tree is getting some very substantial nerfs. Firstly, the reload of the 155mm is going from 18.3 to 19, so a little bit. It's not destroying the gun, but it's definitely going to affect it. The aim time is going to go from 2.5 seconds to 2.7, so you're not going to be able to snapshot nearly so easily. And also, this is a real big one. Wargaming are changing the view range from 380 to 360. This means that quite a lot of players who had all of the field mods, a really good crew, a premium consumable, would be able to have very decent amounts of view range without coated optics or binoculars. You're definitely not going to be doing that now in the T95. I don't think this is really going to destroy the vehicle. Its strength is still in its armor, but this is definitely going to affect the tank for the worse, as you'll find scenarios where you're just getting blasted at long range once you manage to push through those breach locations, rather than, spotting out your opponents and nailing them at long range, or at least spotting them and forcing them to fall back while you're advancing through those choke points. So not good news for the T95, but again, I think this is a necessary nerf to the vehicle. It's in an absolute OP state along with the Tortoise, and I hope to see Tortoise nerfs in a little bit as well. And good job by Wargaming for filing down these OP tanks. It's not enough to just buff the underpowered ones like the Tiger P. When we do have vehicles that are overperforming, I think it's good that Wargaming do shave them down. All right, next, E3. Hold on, they're nerfing the E3? What? That one is a little bit confusing. I did not think that they would nerf the E3, but then again, statistically, it is a little bit too strong for what it is. But that's just because it's got a very low, well, it's got a high skill floor, if that makes sense. So average and below average players will do quite well in the E3 compared to how they usually would, purely because the armor is brokenly good at the front. But Wargaming aren't doing anything about the armor on this vehicle. They are going to just hurt all of its other areas. So its reload is going to go from 17 to 18 seconds. That's a big damage per minute nerf to the T110E3. Also, its aim time is going from 2.5 to 2.7, so you are going to really struggle when it comes to snapping your shots in the E3. Its view range is going from 390 to 270, which means that you are going to have to use coated optics if you want to spot for yourself at decent distances on open maps, unlike you have to right now. And its hit points are also being reduced by 100. I'm not really sure this was the necessary nerf that we needed inside the game. I never really thought of the E3 as being the OP one. However, it is got a statistically high win ratio. So as long as Wargaming are nerfing the Minotauro and the 268 version 4 in the same patch, then I guess it's justifiable that the E3 is going to get nerfed. These do seem quite heavy, but again, they aren't destroying what is strong about the E3, and that is the great frontal armor. They're just destroying its ability to spot for itself, its gun handling, it's a little bit of its firepower, and also a little bit of its durability, which kind of doesn't make sense to me when you think that the 268 version 4 and the Minotauro are now going to end up having more hit points than what is meant to be like the assault tank destroyer. So I do agree with the view range, and I can agree with the firepower, but I can't really agree with the durability on this tank. I think that's one of the only things that's truly special. Okay, next up, T57 Heavy. Looks like it's the final buff or nerf for the American line. And wow, okay. Decreased dispersion when moving and hull turning, and also aim time from 2.9 to 2.7, and they're improving the reverse speed. Wow, really good changes to a tank that really needed some love, Wargaming. Fantastic stuff. The T57 Heavy is sitting right at the bottom of the list, and I really like these changes. I think it's not going to make it completely OP. It's already got the firepower to be OP within that regard, but just improving its ability to deliver its shells will allow you a little bit of flexibility. I, for example, on my T57 Heavy, take field mods that reduce the bloom after firing, but you have to sacrifice other areas of the tank to be able to achieve this. And while I'm definitely still going to do that because that's the whole point of this vehicle, it's going to be really interesting that the difference in the aim time is kind of like using the field mod without having to use it in the next patch. That reverse speed will also be incredibly useful. It's definitely one of the worst things about the tank, and I actually end up lowering increasing my reload time to improve my reverse speed in this vehicle, and I'll probably still do that in the next patch because this thing is all about big bursty clips and being able to survive to get back to be able to deliver them. And with the buffed reverse speed to 14, when you add that to that, 17 backwards is going to be fairly fast for a heavy tank, and that is without a turbo on this vehicle. Looks like it could be very good days for the T57 Heavy. Now, do I think that the vehicle is going to become the new best Tier 10 auto-loading heavy? No, but it will be in a better position than it has ever been, so more reason to dust off your T57 Heavy than ever. And I like these changes by Wargaming. They seem to be adjusting the areas of the vehicle that are weak rather than improving the vehicle's strongest aspects when they want to buff tanks, as they did with the M454, which created this disastrous meta where it's just basically 54 or don't play inside a game mode like Onslaught. Okay, so now we're going on to the French tanks. And, I might have to have a peek. Oh, it is happening. M454 nerfs are happening. Love it, love it, love it, finally. Anyway, let's take a look at the French tank destroyers first. So, the ARL V39 is getting a top speed buff, and also the reload time of its 90mm is being massively improved as well. That's actually a really good change to the ARL, because as everybody knows, currently in the ARL, you use the 105mm and you spam gold in the ARL. So what Wargaming are effectively doing now is they're making it so that you don't have to pay to win by spamming gold on these OP APCR rounds, but instead you can actually use what's meant to be the top gun on this tank and not have to pay to win. So that isn't going to buff the ARL's performance for all of the pay to win players, but it is going to buff it for all of the free to play players. So great change in my opinion from Wargaming for that. Next up, Wargaming are... Hold on, are they nerfing the AMX 65T? Dude, I don't understand that. The AMX 65T is not really... I can't believe you have to just click regular to see any kind of statistics here. I don't really see the AMX 65T as being the best performer, boys, it's got a 46% win ratio in the game right now. That doesn't strike me as a tank that needs a nerf. Wargaming, I would strike this one from the list, even if you do plan on nerfing all of the AMX M4s, because this one really didn't need a nerf, boys and girls. So it's such a nothing nerf as well. It's like 12% on its dispersion. It doesn't really make even of a difference to the tank. It's almost as if Wargaming just want to do it for the sake of it. I don't get it. The tank doesn't need a nerf, and it's not even really a nerf to the tank. It's almost as if they put it in there just for the sake of it. I guess it's probably because when they look at suspensions, maybe they look at the way that they've done it for the next tank as well. Whatever. Now let's look at the AMX M4 This is a very powerful tier 9 French heavy tank that definitely does need to be nerfed. So let's see what Wargaming have done to it. So firstly, they have increased the dispersion when you are moving and turning the hull of both its stock and its upgraded turret. And they are also changing the aiming time of the AMX gun for the 127mm. Well, nobody uses the 127mm. That doesn't mean anything. Next, they've also increased the dispersion during movement and hull traverse. Hold on, this is for the 51 FL. What does that stand for? Is that front line? Now I'm confused. So it doesn't actually look like Wargaming have really nerfed the AMX M451. All they've done really is change the dispersion when you move and when you turn the hull by 14%. It's significant, but it's not going to affect it. And nobody uses the 127mm. You should use the 120 on that tank. Okay, so the tier 9 AMX M451 is still going to be remaining probably one of the best heavy tanks in the tree. Wargaming, why didn't you nerf this tank more? It's completely OP at tier 9. It's packing 2% win ratio above all of the vehicles apart from the brand new one, the BZ68. Wargaming should have really done more to the AMX M451 than they have done. Okay, but let's take a look at the real problem, and that is the AMX M454. It has got over 2% high win ratio than even the Super Conqueror. We're talking about 3% high win ratio than most of the other vehicles. So Wargaming really needs to do something very drastic to this tank. Okay, so firstly, they have increased the dispersion during movement and hull traverse by 33%. So that means that there's going to be a reason to use vertical stabilizers on this tank for the first time in a long time. Next, they've nerfed the 130mm massively. The accuracy has been changed from 0.33 to 0.36, so it's not going to be able to snipe like a laser gun. They've increased the dispersion of the 130mm when you turn the turret by 40%. Well, I actually have to take a look at the statistics of this just to see what we are going to be getting with this AMX M454. Well, at the moment, it is at a state where you don't really need vert stabs, but I can tell you, with those changes, you are definitely going to need vert stabs on this tank if you want to be like super comfortable. Well, not definitely, but look at it, 40% and 33%. We're talking about the movement dispersion going up to 0.16, and we're talking about the turret dispersion going to 0.15. That is massive for the vehicle, especially considering that they're changing the aiming time from 2.2 to 2.5, which will compound on those gun handling nerfs. And also the reload time is going from 13.4 seconds to 14 seconds. Well, thank goodness, because that's really what needed to be adjusted on this tank. The rate of fire is just too darn good. And this will mean that now, with those changes, the new damage per minute on this tank is 2,400, which is much more manageable. All right, I think these are great changes for the AMX M454. I think it's necessary. Now the tank is no longer going to be this like laser point sniper. Now it's going to have worse aim time and worse reload. Great changes in my opinion. Are they going to be enough? Yes, I think they will be enough. They will stop it becoming that kind of meta slave tank that you have to play to remain competitive. But I still think the vehicle will be very strong even with the nerfs. So that nerf gets 2 thumbs up from me, Wargaming. Brilliant, can't wait that I can actually play my other heavy tanks without just getting ruffle stomped by AMX M454s. And I expect that for the next 2 weeks, now that the community knows about this, people will start padding up their statistics in the AMX M454 in preparation for the nerf. All right, now let's take a look at the British tanks. And wow, a vehicle that I'm kind of famous for. The Comet is actually getting buffed, boys and girls. Okay, well, I think that's a good change because the Comet's actually been struggling with regards to win ratio, third from bottom for quite a while. Although I would argue that's because people just don't know how to play the tank, but that's just my opinion. Now, if you want to buff the dispersion values of the Comet when you're moving, I mean, that's lovely. That you still need vert stabs on this tank, I feel. I can't imagine not using vert stabs because you have to improve the bloom after firing. If Wargaming really wanted to buff the Comet, what they would have done is they would have buffed the bloom after firing. Wargaming. So if you're listening to me out there, why not change the bloom after firing from, I don't know, 4 to like 3.5 or 3. I think that would have personally been a much bigger buff to the Comet, but maybe Wargaming are wanting to take baby steps. This feels as if it's just like for the sake of it buff, to be honest with you. It doesn't really feel as if it's going to fix the tank completely. Other aspects of the Comet that they could have improved a little bit would have been maybe the view range, maybe even by 5 meters. That would have really helped the tank because then it can start to drop coated optics and focus in other areas. But yeah, apart from that, this isn't going to fix the Comet overnight. Not that it needs fixing in my opinion, but with regards to the way that the whole player base is playing it, it could have used a little bit more love than that. Next up, Centurion Mark 1. This is definitely a tank that needed some love. I just 44.7% average win ratio. Ye gods. All right, Wargaming are on a improve the gun handling rampage right now, and they're decreasing the dispersion when you move and turn the hull by 30%. That will really help out the Centurion, but is it going to make it a god tier tank overnight? No, it definitely won't. And what's funny about this is if they actually change the movement dispersion by 30% without changing the turret, that actually means that this vehicle is going to have better dispersion when it's moving than when it is turning the turret. Bit of a weird one there. But okay, Wargaming. I have to admit, these kind of just random changes to the improve the dispersion when they're moving, either they're doing some kind of a test to see how it affects the statistics of the tanks, or somebody's just got some weird idea that that is what's going to be enough to fix all these vehicles. In my opinion, I don't really feel like this is very well thought out changes to the Comet and the Centurion. I think there are other areas that they could have improved on these vehicles to make them still feel like they have the same aspects without just doing some kind of blanket change. Centurion 7-1, again, dispersion changed when moving and turning the hull by 33%. Again, I think that Wargaming could have done something a little bit more here to give this vehicle a little bit of a spruce up for 2023. And again, it's going to end up with better dispersion when moving, when turning the turret. Bit of a weirdo, but for me, I kind of like my Centurion 7-1, and it's right in the middle of the pack, so it doesn't really need a buff. So this change will actually help a vehicle that's already performing quite adequately. All right, next up, Centurion Action 10, a vehicle which has just been this kind of like nothing inside the game for quite a while. It's sitting near the bottom of the list, and only the AMX 30B and the T62A are doing worse, and those are both collector's tanks that people aren't really actively playing anyway. So what are Wargaming doing to the top tier British medium? Well, firstly, they're changing the dispersion during movement and also when turning the turret by 29 and also by 33% relatively. Wow, this is a real big buff to this tank. The turret traverse dispersion is going to go down to 0.08 and the hull is going to go down by 29. So we're talking about going to 0.1 when this vehicle is moving. That will definitely be in the realms of not having to use vert stabs on this tank, which will free up an equipment slot for something else that you want to use on this vehicle. But whoa, Wargaming are also buffing the top speed to 55. That's huge. It was quite a medium/slow tank and previously. That will really help the vehicle out. But what will help the vehicle out even more, ladies and gents, boys and girls, is a rate of fire buff. We're talking about an 8-second reload. Ye gods! This could actually be ridiculous. What are we going to get out of this? We are going to get 2,925 damage per minute. Are you kidding me? Now, I'm not sure if this is going to suddenly make the vehicle the best tier 10 medium tank that you're ever going to play. But look, 2,900 now means that it's going to be above the Object 140 and just below the AMX 30B. So if we take away the reward vehicles from this, this is going to mean that the Centurion Action 10 is going to have the third highest damage per minute of any of the tier 10 medium tanks, at least the tech tree ones. Wow, this will be a huge gainer. These buffs they're not going to turn the Centurion Action 10 to being completely overpowered, but this will mean that it's a vehicle that you have an option to play. So great changes there by Wargaming. The only thing that they don't do is that when they do buff up the Centurion Action 10, its still biggest problem has to be the turret armor versus heat. But do we really need to make everything like a hold down crazy monster tank? Probably not. So I like these changes by Wargaming. Get a thumbs up from me. Next up, Wargaming are changing the IKV Type B. All right, this is a tier 7 vehicle, which is very painful to play. Wargaming are improving the accuracy and they're improving the aim time. This should make this vehicle feel like a better transition. up to the UDES, which is the one that everyone wants, right? I'm sure that a lot of you Swedish tankers out there were hoping for a few more buffs to Swedish tanks, but they are performing very well still. Although Wargaming probably did a little bit too much to the Kranvang, if we're honest. But this will be nice for the IKV. I don't think it's going to make it like the most overpowered tank that you're ever going to play. But yeah, it definitely needed a little bit of love as it's below all of the other vehicles with regards to win ratio. Okay, Italian tank changes. This is exciting. And Wargaming are... Hold on. They're nerfing the Prototype Standard B? Seriously? Okay, so they're just nerfing the gun handling on movement by 12%. Okay. Well, why? Why Wargaming? It's got the fourth worst win ratio. Why? Why are you nerfing a medium tank that has the 4th worst win ratio? Am I making a mistake? Increased. No, I'm not. They're actually nerfing the Standard B. It literally makes no sense. Wargaming, what are you doing? It's got the 4th worst win ratio at tier 9. Have you made a mistake? Please justify this. Makes absolutely no sense. This is one of the most fun medium tanks that you can play inside the game at tier 9. Why Wargaming would be nerfing a tank that frankly needs a little bit of a buff, not a nerf, is beyond me. This makes me really worried about what they're doing to the... Oh my god. Look what they're doing to the Progetto. Increase the gun dispersion during movement and hull traverse by 29%. What are Wargaming thinking? The Progetto has got a 48.63% win ratio. It's one of the worst performing medium tanks. Why? Is it because it's popular? Are they nerfing it because it's too popular? What? That's horrendous, ladies and gents, boys and girls. Oh my lord. The Progetto is one of the most fun tanks in the game, and nobody considers it to be a problem or OP, at least in my opinion. That dispersion nerf of 29% is going to mean that this thing has like 0.18 dispersion when moving, which means that you're definitely going to have to use vert stabs. But let's be honest, you're already using vert stabs on this tank. That's horrendous though, ladies and gents. Next, they're decreasing the thickness of the frontal hull armor. Okay, well, so they're basically going to make it so that the upper hull is probably going to be like 40 so it can get overmatched. But that was one of the good things about the Progetto, was the fact that you could kind of angle it like this against most vehicles and get away with some ricochets, and God forbid that they actually have to aim at your lower plate or hit your side armor, which is overmatchable, or hit the whole of your turret. What? Next, they're nerfing the reverse speed by 3 kilometers an hour as well, so it's not able to fall back over ridgelines so much. This is awful. These are awful changes to this vehicle, and everyone knows right now that you try to improve the camera rating of this vehicle, which lowers your top reverse speed to 21 anyway. I really don't think this was necessary. They're taking a bottom 6 performer and they're nerfing it to Kingdom Come. This will really hurt the Progetto 65. I have no idea why Wargaming are doing this. I can see 1, 2, 3 medium tanks that need nerfing, and they haven't been addressed so far. Wargaming, why are you doing this? Seriously, please let me know. Somebody from Wargaming reach out and let me know why you're nerfing the Progetto 65. Please enlighten me so I can try and understand this witchcraft. It makes no sense to me. Okay, so while they're nerfing the Progetto, they are buffing the Rinoceronte. So let's take a look at the Rinoceronte statistics. It is one of the worst performing heavy tanks inside the game. And while I think it's kind of a get good problem, in my opinion, with the Rinoceronte, because as soon as I started to figure the tank out, it was actually very, very strong. Well, not very, very strong, but strong. Can do well enough in the vehicle. I can understand why it's an incredibly hard tank to play because of that awful reload. So it definitely needs a buff with regards to the statistics. And so I'm really excited to see what Wargaming are going to do to it. Firstly, they're improving the frontal turret armor. Okay. That means that we're going to go from probably a tier 10 Italian heavy tank that really can't take a hit to one that can. The interesting thing about the Rinoceronte right now is that apart from the weak point on top, the cheeks do struggle against heat, so I guess what Wargaming are going to do, my prediction is they'll buff up the cheek armor to a point where it's got about 340. So my prediction is that it's going to go from about 190 impact up to about 210 or maybe 220. And the reason why Wargaming want to do this is they want it so that heat rounds just can't whiff their way through the front of the vehicle. That's a good change because it's definitely one of the downsides to the Rinoceronte. You have to be able to expose that turret to be able to trade with your opponents. And when heat rounds just go through the whole of the front of your tank, I think it is a necessary change. Next, they're improving the shell velocity of the heat round by 22%. Okay, that's interesting. The heat round currently has 756 meters a second shell velocity, and it's going to be going up to about 922. So this will allow you to just spam gold. It's funny because I hardly ever really needed to just spam gold in the Rinoceronte anyway. It would have been nice if Wargaming had just made improvements to intuition for auto reloaders rather than doing it like that. But yeah, an advantage to the tank. And next, they're improving the reverse speed by 3 kilometers an hour. That will really help the Rinoceronte. And let me tell you why. It will really help the Rinoceronte because the Rinoceronte takes the field mod that improves its reload time. One of the best field mods on any Italian auto reloader is Focus on Firepower. But Focus on Firepower lowers your reverse speed by 3 to a horrible level. So if Wargaming buff the reverse speed from 12 to 15, this will allow you to take Focus on Firepower, which improves the reload time of the tank by 3% without having like a penalty from it. So that will definitely be a big help to the Rinoceronte. Interestingly, Wargaming are buffing the aspects of this tank that I feel that they can without making the vehicle just flat out OP. If they had buffed the rate of fire of this tank, it would become the new meta vehicle to play, really. And so I like these changes. I think they're good for the Rinoceronte. I feel like it will give a little bit of love to the tank without just making it unnecessarily overpowered. And while I don't expect it to suddenly be the best auto-loading heavy, let's be honest, now that the Kranvang has been nerfed so much, there aren't really that many auto-loading heavy tanks that have armor outside of the VZ55. And so with the Rinoceronte getting a buff, this might become one of the more competitive ones, whereas at the moment, it's definitely not. So all in all, these changes, I think all in all, they're good, but there are some weird things. Firstly, Wargaming removed the Progetto and the standard B nerfs, completely unnecessary. Next, Wargaming, please try to do things that are, should we say, more thoughtful than just buffing the dispersion when moving on a wide variety of tanks. It feels like you've just put them in there for the sake of it. Next, Wargaming, good changes on the AMX M4 54, but don't change the AMX 65T. And I'd also like to see what Wargaming are thinking about with the T123. I feel like it might be a little bit heavy-handed with the vehicle, in my humble opinion. But all in all, really interesting buffs and nerfs. And I have to give Wargaming massive respect for actually adjusting the balance of their game. And I would give them huge amounts of praise if it wasn't for one thing. And that is Wargaming, that all of these changes, they don't really mean anything while you sit there, twiddle your thumbs, sitting on your hands, and don't do what the game actually needs. And that is, why aren't you nerfing the tier 10 reward vehicles? Look, it was okay, arguably okay, back in the day when vehicles like the Chieftain and the 279E were not owned by that many players. Now, there's so many people taking them out onto the battlefield, and there's a reason why they're packing 59% win rate and nearly 58% win rate for the Chieftain. And no, it's not just because the better players have the vehicles and are playing them. It is because they are flat out overpowered as well. Wargaming, you can buff and nerf tech tree tanks to your heart's content. And while I am happy that you're doing some things like nerfing the AMX M4 54, please, I implore you, I think every single 279E and every single Chieftain player out there would like to see the tanks nerfed, because that would mean that they could play a wider variety of vehicles in a wider variety of game modes without jeopardizing their team and also their overall win ratio, because they could be matched up against an overpowered reward vehicle. So please, Wargaming, it would mean so much to the community, and I really think it would actually be very well received if you were to even make small nerfs to the 279E and the Chieftain and put them in their place. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, those were the buffs and nerfs coming to some of your favorite tanks in the next patch of World of Tanks. If you like this video and you like my summary and my breakdown, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments which buffs and nerfs you're most looking forward to and which ones you don't think are necessary inside the game at all. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic and hopefully I'll see you soon.